When was the last time you sat in a room with your own thoughts and felt truly alone? I am not asking when you last scrolled through your phone or when you last watched a movie. I'm asking when you last existed without an internal commentary running in the background. For most people, the answer is terrifying. They cannot remember. You wake up and the noise is there before your eyes open. It is a low hum of anxiety, a checklist of failures, and a sudden panic about an email you haven't sent yet. It feels like living in a crowded apartment where the tenants never sleep. You try to focus, but the noise screams for attention. You try to sleep, and the noise decides it is time to solve every problem you have ever ignored. You have tried to fix this. You downloaded the apps that promise calm oceans. You bought the noise-canceling headphones. You read the books about morning routines, but none of it worked. The silence always broke. The calm always evaporated the moment a real stressor hit. You found yourself standing in the kitchen, completely overwhelmed by the simple act of existing. It is not your fault that these fixes failed. They treat the symptom, not the disease. Consider the numbers. Research reveals that the average person now experiences a continuous state of partial attention for over 16 hours a day. We are operating with a dashboard that is constantly flashing red, and we have convinced ourselves that this is just what it means to be an adult. We think the noise is a sign of a busy, important life. We are wrong. The Romans understood something we have forgotten. 2,000 years ago, a Roman legionary stood on the front lines. He was surrounded by the screams of dying men and the thunder of cavalry. Yet, he operated with a profound, disciplined silence. It was not just the absence of speech. It was an active state of internal fortification. They viewed silence not as a luxury, but as a weapon of war. A noisy mind reacts. A silent mind commands. And today, the story of Jason Anderson will prove it to you. Let us look at Charlotte, North Carolina. It is a city of glass towers that hums with the frequency of money changing hands. On the 34th floor of the steel monolith, Jason Anderson sits. He is 38 years old. He wears suits that cost more than a mortgage payment. To the casual observer, Jason is a picture of success. He is a senior financial advisor. But if you look closer, you see the cracks. His office is a sensory nightmare. 3 monitors pulse with shifting graphs that dictate his mood. His iPhone sits face down, a deliberate choice to ignore the notifications that rattle the surface every 4 minutes. The hum of the ventilation system keeps his nervous system on a low simmer. He is trapped in a box of light and sound. Jason fears a specific future. He looks at the partners in his firm, men in their late 50s with eyes that have lost their luster. He sees men who have accumulated wealth but lost the ability to sit still for 5 minutes without a drink. He calls it the gray zone. It is a state where you are successful on paper but internally hollow. Jason is terrified that he is already halfway there. He tried 3 specific hacks to fix the noise. First was the digital detox. He deleted his social media apps for a month. He found that without the digital distraction, the internal noise became louder. He re-downloaded the apps to drown out his own mind. Second was the Pomodoro technique. He tried to work in sprints, but the timer became a source of stress. Third was mindfulness meditation. He spent the entire hour thinking about his taxes. He sat in his car one Tuesday evening, unable to turn the engine off. The thought hit him hard. Maybe I just don't have what it takes. He accepted the lie, but the next morning a mandatory wellness retreat appeared on his calendar. It was at a private estate on the outskirts of the city. He went because he had no choice. The drive took Jason into the Carolina countryside. The GPS died as the roads narrowed. He arrived at a stone fortress, surrounded by high walls. He stepped out of his BMW and was met with a silence so heavy it felt like pressure against his eardrums. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. He felt exposed without the background noise to hide his internal racket. He approached the heavy oak door. It opened before he could knock. Inside, the atmosphere was one of deliberate order. There were no televisions, no digital screens, just books and the smell of lemon oil. In the center of the hall stood a man in his 60s with a frame that suggested military precision. His name was David. He did not smile. He simply looked at Jason. It was a look that dissected him. Jason felt the urge to fill the silence with chatter, but he couldn't. David walked toward him. "You are vibrating," he said. His voice was a gravelly rumble. Jason blinked. "Excuse me?" "Your posture, your eyes. You were running at a speed your body cannot sustain. Why are you here?" Jason gave the prepared answer. "My firm sent me. We are looking to optimize performance." David stared at him. The pause stretched out agonizingly. "You are here because you are losing a war. You have checked your pockets 3 times. You cannot stand to be in this room because the silence is too loud for you. That makes you weak." The words stung. "I am a senior advisor. I am not weak." David tilted his head. "Then prove it. If you lost your phone, your clients, and your title tomorrow, who would be left? Describe him to me." Jason opened his mouth, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know. He had no definition of himself that wasn't tied to the noise. David nodded. "You treat your mind like a tavern, open to anyone who wishes to enter. We are going to close the tavern. Go to the garden. Sit on the stone bench. Do not move. Do not speak. Watch the water in the fountain. Do this for 1 hour." Jason walked into the walled garden. The stone bench was cold. He sat. He felt a phantom vibration in his pocket. He stared at the fountain. For the first 10 minutes, his mind rebelled. It threw up images of spreadsheets. It replayed arguments. He shifted on the bench. The noise was fighting for its life. David appeared later, standing in the shadow of a colonnade. The Roman Legionary did not fight as an individual. He fought as part of a machine, but the machine only worked because the individual had mastered himself. He stood in the line, surrounded by the screams of the dying. The modern man would panic. The Legionary stood. Why? Because he was trained to hold the line internally. Jason listened, his eyes fixed on the water. "You think silence is the absence of noise," David continued. "That is the mistake. You cannot turn off the world. Silence is the presence of internal order. It is a high ground. When you sit on a hill, you see the battle clearly. You, Jason, are living in the valley. You are reacting to every sound. You have no high ground." David stepped into the sunlight. "This is the internal furnace." The Legionary had a fire inside him. It was the fire of discipline. It burned away the trivial. You must build this fire. Every time your mind wanders, you are letting the fuel escape. Jason spent the rest of the day trying to apply this. It was agonizing. Every time he pulled his focus back to the water, his mind darted away. He realized how weak his focus muscles had become. When the hour was up, he felt exhausted. But for a brief second, the noise dipped. There was a gap between his thoughts. He caught a glimpse of the world without commentary. Weeks passed. Jason returned to his job in Charlotte. He practiced the internal furnace during his commute. He had partial success. He was calmer. But it was fragile. A sudden drop in the tech sector sent his phone buzzing with panicked calls. The noise returned, flooding his mind. He found himself pacing his office. He realized he needed more than a metaphor. He returned to the estate. He told David of his failure. "Your fire is small," David said. "You are still looking for a hack. The Romans won with engineering. They knew the terrain. This is lesson 2, the visible path." David led him to a table covered in maps. "You are losing the war because you cannot see the destination. Uncertainty of destination is the mother of anxiety. Your mind is noisy because it is lost. You have too many open loops." David pointed to the map. Micro-action. The mind quiets when it has a clear, executable command. You cannot tell your mind to be calm. You must give it a specific task. The Legionary did not think about winning the war. He thought about, hold the shield, step forward. He reduced the chaos into singular, visible actions. David handed Jason a small notebook. "Write down 3 tasks, not 10. 3, they must be small enough that you cannot fail to do them right now. Visualize them, then do them. Modern neuroscience validates this. Research into the default mode network shows it is the source of mental noise. It is responsible for rumination. When a person engages in a focused, specific task, the brain shifts activity to the task-positive network. This shift effectively quiets the noise. The Romans understood these mechanics through observation. By forcing the mind to focus on the shield, they were shutting down the noise-generating machinery of the brain. Jason was learning to pull the lever that switched off the noise. Jason took the notebook back to Charlotte. He started small. Instead of panicking about the quarterly review, he wrote, "Call Mr. Henderson. Draft email." He executed them. The noise began to recede. He felt a rhythm returning to his days. He was months into his training. He thought he had conquered it. He thought he had mastered the silence. But the universe sends a catastrophe. 3 months later, Jason sat in his office. He was in the flow state. He felt invincible. Then, the red light on his desk phone flashed. It was the direct line from the managing partner. "Jason," the partner's voice was tight. "We have a situation. You need to come to the conference room now. Bring your files on the offshore accounts. And bring your lawyer." The line went dead. Jason stared at the receiver. The silence he had fought to build shattered. The external noise flooded back in. But worse was the internal noise. It rushed back into the void, a tidal wave of fear. He felt his chest tighten. The fortress in his mind was under siege. Jason stood up. The motion felt robotic. The files were on his computer, but his hands were shaking. The word "situation" hung in the air. In the world of finance, it was a euphemism for disaster. It meant audits. It meant ruin. He walked down the hallway. The portraits of the founders watched him. He tried to summon the internal furnace. He tried to focus on the next step, but the next step was a terrifying unknown. He had no micro-action for an existential threat. The specific resource he lacked was certainty. He reached the conference room doors. He could hear voices inside, low and urgent. He tried to find the high ground David had spoken of, but the high ground was gone. He was in the valley again. The irony struck him. He had spent months perfecting his silence, only to realize it was conditional. It was a fair-weather silence. It worked when the grass were green. But now the storm had arrived. The noise was back, screaming that he was a fraud. He placed his hand on the cold door handle. He realized he was holding his breath. He promised himself he would fix this, but as he pushed the door open, a cold realization settled in his gut. His history of mental noise had left a residue of doubt. He didn't trust himself to navigate the chaos. He stepped into the room, and the silence of the past few months seemed like a dream. The war was back, and he was losing. Jason did not go home that night. He did not go to a bar. He did not call his wife to confess his fears. Instead, he drove straight back to the estate. It was past midnight when his tires crunched on the gravel driveway. The stone house was dark, save for a single light burning in the library window. He didn't care if David was asleep. He pounded on the heavy oak door. He felt like a deserter returning to the only person who could court-martial him back to life. The door opened. David stood there in a robe, looking not the least bit surprised. He looked at Jason's disheveled suit, the sweat on his brow, the wild look in his eyes. He stepped aside and let Jason enter. They walked to the library. The fire was low, just embers glowing in the hearth. Jason collapsed into a leather chair. He buried his face in his hands. "I panicked," Jason said, his voice cracking. "Everything you taught me, the furnace, the path, it all vanished. The moment the partner called, I was back in the valley. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. I failed." David stood by the mantel. He looked down at Jason with an expression that was neither disappointed nor sympathetic. It was clinical. "You did not fail," David said. "You were finally tested, and you found out that your silence was a hobby. It was a luxury. You treated it like a spa day. You thought the silence was for when things were quiet. That is backward. The silence is for the war. This crisis is not an interruption of your life, Jason. This is the real war. Everything else was just drills. David leaned forward. Listen to me closely. Panic is a reaction. It is biological. It is fast. Purpose is a decision. It is slow. It requires a high ground. You panicked because you had no high ground. You were fighting for your job. You were fighting for your money. You were fighting for your reputation. Those are external things. They can be taken away. Of course you panicked. You were defending a fortress made of paper. Jason looked up. Then what do I do? If the fortress is paper, what do I defend? You defend the legionary, David said. You defend the man who holds the line. The crisis you face demands a resource you lack. You think that resource is legal knowledge or financial wizardry. It is not. The resource you lack is the ability to stand still while the world burns. You have spent months answering the question of who you would be without your title. Tonight, you get to live the answer. Go back to Charlotte. Do not fight the crisis. Build the high ground. Jason stood up. The shaking had stopped. The fear was still there, cold and heavy in his stomach, but the noise had dimmed. He had a direction. Jason returned to his home in Charlotte at 3 in the morning. The house was silent. His wife was asleep. He walked into his home office, a room he usually avoided because it felt like a prison. He sat in the chair. The glow of the computer screen was the only light. He had a choice. He could open a beer and stare at the ceiling, or he could start building the high ground. He remembered the internal furnace. He closed his eyes. He visualized the fire. He imagined the walls of his mind closing in, shutting out the noise of the impending lawsuit, the judgment of his peers, the fear of bankruptcy. He focused on his breath. In, out. The fire burned away the what-ifs. It left only the what-is. He opened his eyes. He looked at the stack of files regarding the offshore accounts. It was a mess of numbers and legal jargon. The old Jason would have panicked at the sheer volume of it. The old Jason would have called a lawyer immediately and begged for a solution. But the legionary doesn't beg. He builds. He picked up the pen. He wrote down 3 tasks. Identify the discrepancy. Print the transaction logs. Highlight the dates. Simple. Mechanical. Visible. He began with the first one. He didn't think about the outcome. He didn't think about the partner's sneer. He just found the discrepancy. That was a win. He circled it. Evidence. He moved to the second task. He printed the logs. The sound of the printer whirring in the silent house was the only noise. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound. It was the sound of construction. He was building a road through the chaos. Hours passed. The sun began to bleed through the blinds. He had organized 2 years of messy data into a single, coherent timeline. He had found the error. It wasn't fraud. It was a clerical oversight, a mistake made by a junior associate 3 years ago that had snowballed under his watch. It was fixable, but it required admitting the mistake and presenting a correction plan. The resistance hit him then. The old voice returned. It whispered in his ear, "If you admit this, they will fire you. They will think you are incompetent. You will lose the respect of the firm." The noise tried to rush back in. His chest tightened. He picked up the phone. He called David. It was 6 in the morning. "I found the problem," Jason said, "but I'm afraid to act. It requires me to be vulnerable." "You are thinking like a mercenary," David said over the phone. "A mercenary fights for the payout. He fights for the reputation. He fights to protect the image. He will run or lie to save his skin. A legionary fights for the standard. He fights for the line. He stands in the truth because the truth is solid ground. If you lie, you build on sand. If you tell the truth, you build on stone. Do not worry about the job. Worry about the man who does the job." Jason hung up. He looked at the files. He realized that every action he took was a vote for the mercenary, or a vote for the legionary, a vote for the noise, or a vote for the silence. He had spent 38 years voting for the image. He decided to change his vote. He drafted the email to the partner. He attached the files. He wrote a clear, concise explanation. No excuses, just the error and the fix. He hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving the outbox sounded like a cannon shot in the quiet room. He leaned back. He was exhausted. But the noise was gone. The high ground was established. 3 weeks later, the crisis officially ended. The firm accepted Jason's report. The oversight was corrected, fines were paid, and the offshore accounts were restructured. No one was fired. The partner who had accused him actually nodded at him in the hallway. It was a small gesture, but for Jason, it felt like a metal pin to his chest. He sat in the partner's office for the final review. The older man looked over his glasses. "I have to admit, Anderson," the partner said, shuffling papers. "When this broke, I thought you were going to crumble. You looked like a ghost that day, but this report, it's clean, it's thorough. You handled it like a professional." Jason sat still. His hands were folded in his lap. He didn't fidget. He didn't rush to fill the silence with nervous chatter. "I just took it one step at a time," Jason said. The partner studied him for a moment. "You seem different, quieter. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Walking out of the office, Jason realized the missing piece. He had always thought confidence came from knowing the future and having guarantees. But the Legionary didn't have a guarantee. He only had the moment. The why wasn't about becoming a partner or making $1 million. The why was the silence itself. It was the ability to remain himself, regardless of the chaos. He had found the high ground, and the view from up here was clear. He met David at the estate that weekend. They stood in the garden by the fountain. "The storm has passed," David said. "The papers are signed. The threat is gone. This is the danger zone." "Why?" Jason asked. "I won. You survived," David corrected. "Survival breeds complacency. The external urgency is gone. You no longer have a crisis to force you into silence. Now you must choose it when the sun is shining. Most men fail here. They go back to sleep." 6 months later, the normalcy returned with a vengeance. The crisis was a distant memory. The markets were bullish. Jason's portfolio was growing. He was being invited to the right dinners again. The external pressure had evaporated. It was a Saturday morning. Jason woke up in his warm bed. The house was silent. His wife was making coffee downstairs. The sun was streaming through the curtains. It was the perfect scene of domestic bliss. His phone was on the nightstand. It was silent. There were no emergencies. He lay there for a moment. The temptation was subtle, but it was there. A voice whispered, "You earned this. You can relax. You can check the news. You can scroll for a bit. You don't need to be on guard. The war is over." He looked at the phone. It was a portal to the noise, a portal to the dopamine hits that used to rule his life. He could almost taste the mindless scrolling. It would be so easy to slide back into the fog, to let the tenants back into the apartment, to be the old Jason, just a richer, more comfortable version. He sat up. He remembered the Legionary. The Legionary didn't train only when the barbarians were at the gate. He trained when the camp was quiet. He polished his armor when there was no battle. He understood that the silence was not a break from the war. The silence was the weapon. Jason got out of bed. He didn't touch the phone. He went downstairs, poured a cup of coffee, and walked out onto the back porch. He sat on the wooden steps. He watched the sun rise over the Charlotte skyline in the distance. He closed his eyes. He practiced the furnace. He focused on his breath. He sharpened the blade of his mind in the safety of the morning. This is the essence of identity change. William James, the father of modern psychology, noted that habits are not formed by massive bursts of effort, but by the silent, repeated actions of daily life. Neuroplasticity confirms that the brain is shaped by what we do repeatedly. By choosing silence when the noise was optional, Jason was cementing his new identity. He was no longer a man who practiced silence. He was a silent man. He was a legionary in peacetime. 5 years passed. Jason Anderson is now 43. He is still a financial advisor in Charlotte, but the office feels different. The frantic energy is gone. The 3 monitors are still there, but he no longer grips the mouse with white knuckles. The boxes on his desk are cleared. He arrives early, not to catch up, but to sit in the quiet before the market opens. He drives to the estate on a Tuesday afternoon. He doesn't go there for lessons anymore. He goes to maintain the alliance. He finds David in the garden, older now, moving more slowly, but the stillness is as solid as the stone walls. They sit together. They don't speak for the first 10 minutes. It is a comfortable silence. A silence shared between 2 men who know the war never really ends. It just changes shape. "You know," David said, watching a bird land on the fountain, "I saw your partner at a gala last month. He didn't know I knew you. He pointed you out. He said, 'That guy, Anderson, he's the quietest man in the room, but when he moves, the earth shakes. That is the highest compliment a Roman can receive.'" Jason smiled. "It took me a long time to realize that the noise wasn't my enemy. It was my signal. It was the alarm telling me I was losing my footing. I used to try to kill the noise. Now I just use it to find the silence." David nodded. The Legionary's silence is not an empty room. It is a fortress, and you have built yours well. Now we must turn the camera away from Jason Anderson and point it directly at you. You have watched this story. You have seen the cost of the noise. You have seen the devastation of a mind without a high ground. And now you are standing at the crossroads. You can click off this video and return to the scroll. You can let the tenants back into your apartment. You can go back to sleep. Or you can ask yourself the question that matters. What is your real motive? Are you looking for a quick fix, a pill to make the anxiety stop? Then you are a mercenary. You will lose. The noise will return the moment the video ends. But if you are looking for the silence, the real silence, then listen. The noise in your head is not a flaw in your design. It is a signal. It is the warning light on the dashboard of your mind. It is telling you that you are living in the valley. It is telling you that you are reacting to the world instead of commanding it. It is inviting you to build the fortress. The Romans gave us the map. We've seen it work in the glass towers of Charlotte, and it will work in your life. Here are the 5 lessons of the Legionary silence. First, recognize the noise. Stop calling it stress. Call it a lack of internal discipline. Admit that you are vibrating. Second, build the internal furnace. You do not need more time. You need more focus. Burn the trivial. Seal the leaks. Third, find the visible path. Panic comes from uncertainty. Silence comes from micro-action. Do not solve the war. Just hold the shield. Take the next step. Fourth, defend the high ground. The crisis is not the exception. The crisis is the rule. Do not wait for the storm to practice your silence. Practice it now so you are ready when the sky turns black. Fifth, become a legionary. Identity is not a feeling. It is a series of votes. Every time you choose silence over the distraction, you cast a vote for the man you want to become. If this story has reached you, do not let it fade into the noise. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment. Tell us your why. Tell us what fortress you are building. The conversation is part of the discipline. And remember the final maxim of the Roman line. The silent man is not the one who has nothing to say. He is the one who knows that words are expensive, and silence is the currency of power. Hold the line.